Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to another amazing Real Talk on Palestine here at the Suli Institute. It's been a little bit since we have come together. As you know, we put a pause on our regular programming with October 7th and turned all of our attention to Palestine and all of the issues. And I'm really proud to say that I think all of the content that we've produced since then, and I should say our very first Palestine programming was on October 7th. And from there, we have had very powerful conversations with people from Palestine, other professors. Today, we are incredibly honored to have with us Professor Nader Hashemi, longtime friend. He's been here, before with other conversations for like Reasoning with God, I think when we started, the Suli Institute a few years back. But we are so honored to have him here. He's a board member for Usuli, but he is also very recently has become the director of the Al-Walid Center for Muslim and Christian Understanding. And as you may know, this was the center that was founded by John Esposito and headed up for many, many years. He recently retired, and Nader is now in the position of the director, and that's part of Georgetown University. Where he's also a professor of Middle East and Islamic politics. And I don't know of anyone else who has a better finger on the pulse of everything that's going on with our world, and from a political perspective. And we have a very interesting conversation today. The focus is the complicity of Muslim leadership, autocratic regimes, and ruling elites. And I thought that this would be an incredible conversation where we could learn more about what is happening behind the scenes, the things that we really don't hear about. We recognize that Muslim governments have, tried to portray a certain position with regard to Gaza. I mean, we know when we look at the behavior and the actions of, what is happening, there is complicity, obviously. But there's one face, and then there's another reality that is taking place behind the scenes. And so we wanted to take this opportunity to really delve into that and just see where the conversation goes. I have asked Nader to please just start by kind of laying out the landscape for where we are. I mean, I recognize that these programming sessions are going to be important historically. We will look back on these, and I always want to make a point to say, when we met at this point in time, where were we? What was happening at, and so we know today, I think is something like day 118, if I'm not mistaken. And so I just wanted to start by asking Nader to just kind of bring us up to speed. Where are we today, and what's going on? And then we can just take the conversation from there. So.
Okay. Thank you very much, Grace. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. Assalamu alaikum to Khalid. Huge honor to be here. Of course, I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. These are, as I said before October the 7th, going back several years, I kept saying these are the dark days of Muslim history, not realizing that we would hit this moment where it's perhaps the darkest moment that I can think of in my adult life for Muslims, given what's happening in the Islamic world today, but specifically what's happening to the Palestinians in Gaza. So I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to share some thoughts. You're right, this is day 118 or 119 since the war began, when Hamas came out of Gaza, broke down the prison walls, and committed what I think we have to acknowledge were a series of atrocities that need to be investigated, and that began this phase of an Israeli attack, allegedly to go and eradicate Hamas, but as we're seeing, have effectively targeted the people who live in Gaza, which is one of the most congested, densely populated places of the world. And it's always important to remember half of the population is children. 70% of the people who live in Gaza are refugees from the 1948 war and their descendants. And, when this war began and right from the beginning, the Israeli defense minister, Gallant, said that they were going to cut off the fuel, the food, and the electricity to Gaza, thus engaging in what is not only collective punishment, but is clearly, an act what seems to be of genocidal intent. And what's, I think, so distinguishing about this particular war in this particular moment, it's very rare for a country that's prosecuting a war to be this explicit in terms of what its intentions are. And for anyone who has any doubt, all you have to read is those 10 pages in the South African application to the World Court that documents the genocidal intent, statement after statement, not by random people or some obscure minister, but by the senior leadership of the State of Israel. And that's why, I think it's accurate to say, we can say now, without any ambiguity or anyone attacking you for exaggerating or engaging in hyperbole, that what we're seeing right now in Gaza is an attempted genocide. And that's not my personal opinion, because last Friday, exactly a week ago, the International Court of Justice issued a provisional, ruling that instructed Israel to prevent genocide because the application made a plausible case that Israel was in violation of the UN Genocide Convention. And of course, what's so interesting to remember last week is that Israel argued to throw the case out, and the court looked at the evidence and said, no, there is a plausible case of genocide, and they'll make a final determination down the road. And of course, the court was overwhelming. It was 15-2, and even on a couple of occasions, the Israeli judge voted with the majority explicitly on the ruling when it came to genocidal intent. So the evidence is there, and of course, what's so tragic is not only are the Palestinians being victimized in a terrible way in Gaza by the State of Israel, but what's so significant about this moment is that we're having this conversation in the United States, where the United States is an active participant in this genocide that we're seeing. And I think it's actually quite shocking when I follow the commentary in the press and I talk to my students. The U.S. role is often underplayed. I mean, these are American-made weapons that are being dropped on the people of Gaza. This is a Biden administration that every time the UN met to try and engage in some sort of protective measure to the Palestinians, the Biden administration proudly stood against the world and vetoed any UN Security Council resolution and stood against the world at the General Assembly. And on top of that, has fast-tracked and made sure that Israel got all of the weapons that it wanted, subverting the normal congressional review on at least 2 occasions. And that sort of just highlights the complicitous role of the Biden administration. And I'm told that if the Biden administration would just stop sending weapons to Israel, stop sending tank shells, the war would end tomorrow. So that's, I think something we all have to remember, because our location matters when we make moral judgments. I think the moral responsibility on Muslims living and American citizens who are living in the United States, people of conscience who are living in the United States, is much greater than someone living, let's say, in Bangladesh or someone living in the other part of the world where their government is not actively involved in perpetuating these crimes. So this is a horror show. I think this is a watershed moment. I can't see our world going back to before October the 7th. The analogy that I've been using is this feels like another 9/11 moment, another Iraq war moment in terms of the significance of these events that will have a long-lasting legacy. It's very difficult at this moment to say things and make observations with accuracy, because in many ways we're still in the middle of the storm, right? We don't have that perspective. We don't know how this is going to play out. Up until now, with all of these atrocities, the official figures, at least that everyone recognizes, about 27,000 Palestinians killed, 70% of them women and children, over 10,000 children, killed. But the numbers are much greater because there's at least 6,000 or 7,000 people who are unaccounted for, most likely buried under the rubble. So the final accounting still needs to be done. And of course, there's no end in sight. I mean, every day it gets worse. So the most recent sort of tragic news is literally the day after the International Court of Justice instructed Israel to take provisional measures to prevent any acts that constitute genocide. The next day, all of the supporters of Israel in the West on very flimsy evidence, stopped funding the leading United Nations organization that's responsible for the care of Palestinians, on the assumption that 12 people had committed some heinous act on October the 7th. And not only is that a form of collective punishment, but it's happening precisely at the moment, in the midst of a genocide, the day after the World Court has ruled on these provisional measures. And I remember reading the response from the United States, from Canada, from England, and there was one line in the British government's response to the World Court ruling that said that they completely disagree with the application that South Africa put forward. They disagree with the court's provisional ruling, and they found what South Africa has done was, quote, wrong and provocative. And then a friend of mine commented to me that the English government, the British government, finds what South Africa has done to stop mass murder wrong and provocative, but the British government and the Canadian government and the American government and other governments don't find the death of 10,000 children wrong or provocative. I mean, this is how bad it is. We always have to remember how bad it is. We are talking about 100 Palestinian children being killed every single day on average for the last 3.5 months.
Right.
And Joe Biden, who wants to get reelected and wants to distinguish himself from Donald Trump, still can't utter the word ceasefire. So that's how bad it is. So I don't want to sort of rehearse here, the details, but I do want to bring to everyone's attention breaking news that happened this morning. I think it's a positive development. It should get some public attention. This was reported in the BBC this morning and the New York Times that more than 800 serving officials in the US and Europe have signed a statement warning that their own government's policies in Israel and Gaza could amount to, quote, grave violations of international law. This transatlantic statement, a copy of which was passed to the BBC, says that their administrations, in other words, the governments of the West, risk being complicit in, quote, one of the worst human catastrophes of this century, and that their expert advice, their internal discussions with their own governments have been sidelined by the elected leaders. One signatory to the statement, a US government official with more than 25 years of national security experience, told the BBC of how he has been continually dismissed when he's raised these concerns. And to add insult to injury, governments continue to do what they've been doing with respect to Gaza, supporting Israel. But this is the key point in the statement that I think is very important, and it echoes what I just said a moment ago. The statement of these 800 Western officials, government officials, say, quote, what's really different here is that we're not failing to prevent something that's happening. We're actually complicit in it. And I'm quoting the statement. This is fundamentally different from any other situation I can recall, added the official, who spoke on condition of anonymity. And the statement was signed by civil servants from the US, the EU, and 11 European countries, including UK, France, and Germany. So this just reminds us of how this is really a watershed moment, a historic moment for the world. It's generating this type of debate and sort of reaction. But of course, what's been, I think, completely missing in the debate among Muslims, among people around the world, is what we're here to talk about, and that's the Muslim complicity. When I mean Muslim complicity, I want to be clear: Muslim government complicity, right? The average citizen in Jordan or in Egypt or in other parts of the world, really, because they're living under dictatorships, don't have a voice, right? We're dealing with these dictators, these despots, all of whom, not every one, many of whom, particularly in the Arab world, are close allies of the West. And so there's a lot to say about this. I want to ask some questions of Khalid to sort of draw him out. But let me just make one sort of general comment, because I was thinking about what I'm going to say today, and it's sort of we're meeting about exactly 1 week after the International Court of Justice ruling, and I think one of the big takeaways from the International Court of Justice ruling was, what one thought that had: why didn't any Muslim government take the case to the court? They have the resources. They've done it before, because if you know the story of genocide, just a few months ago, or actually maybe about a year ago, Gambia, with the support of other Muslim countries, took Myanmar to the World Court for genocide against the Rohingya, and a provisional ruling similar to the one against Israel was issued. And so it's been done before. So the question is, why didn't any Muslim government do this in the case of Gaza? And because the question of Palestine is an identity issue for Muslims. And then I started to think about that. And then I said, you know what? I'm glad that they didn't do it, because they would have tainted the court case, given the nature of their rule and given their own human rights record. Better that they stayed away, and that South Africa, which has a democratic government that has a history of struggling against repression, better that they took the lead. And I'm glad no member of the Arab League or the Organization of Islamic Conference took any sort of active part in this, because it really would have corrupted the ruling, right? If, let's say, I don't know, some country with let's say General Sisi, theoretically, people would have laughed at it, right?
Right, exactly.
I mean, who are you to talk about human rights given what you are responsible for? So that's sort of a thought that I had, but the sort of related thought that I think is central, and one of the lessons and takeaway, speaking of Muslim complicity, is I think the reason why Muslim governments, leaders and dictators didn't go to the World Court over what Israel is doing in Gaza is because they deeply detest the core principle that is at the root of South Africa's application against Israel, and that is accountability for human rights abuses. Muslim dictators don't want to be accountable. And in fact, I suspect secretly among themselves, they were saying, we hope that Israel's petition to throw the case out is successful, because that makes our political rule more easier. We don't want accountability for human rights, right? This is, I think, something that we have to, I think, acknowledge. And the other sort of point here that I've been thinking, and I've been saying this to friends, I haven't written this publicly, the horror show in Gaza could end tomorrow if Muslim governments wanted it to end, simply because of the leverage that they have over the West. And I'm speaking specifically about the question of oil. And people look at me and they say, Nader, what are you talking about? They can't do anything like that. They have their own oil economies. They have their own interests. Well, you know what? There's a precedent, because if you know modern Muslim history, modern Middle Eastern history, in 1973, the exact same, it's not the exact same horror show, but at least Muslim governments led by the late King Faisal. I'm not a fan of the Saudi royal family, but compared to his successors, God bless his soul. Yeah. And so there's a very famous story that you should know, that when, after the 1973 Arab-Israeli war, King Faisal led a boycott, an oil boycott against the West. Henry Kissinger threw a panic attack. He was the Secretary of State at the time, and he calls King Faisal and says, "What are you doing? I thought you were our ally. Don't you know this is going to hurt your own economy?" And King Faisal famously said, and I have the passage here, he famously said at the meeting, or the conversation with Henry Kissinger in 1973, that he said, quote, "You are the ones, the West is the ones," America was telling Henry Kissinger, "you are the ones who can't live without oil. We come from the desert, and our ancestors used to live on dates and camel milk. And if needed, we will return to our tents." Wow. So, so there is a precedent here. And I think so the question is, well, what's happened since 1973 until today? I think the answer is clear. The nature, the level of despotism and corruption has gotten infinitely worse with each passing decade. King Faisal had some moral integrity, and he said he's not going to stand by and be humiliated. And so I think we have to remember that the leverage that Muslim governments theoretically have over the West is much more than people are willing to admit. Yeah. And so that's why I've reached the conclusion, and I want to sort of, this is the first question to Khalid. One of the things that I think is that connects the plight of the Palestinians to the question of political despotism in the Arab world is the problem of ongoing authoritarianism. And so I reached a conclusion that there's a formula that I wanted to sort of, put on the table here, that there can be, and there probably likely will not be, any Palestinian national liberation unless there is Arab and regional democratization. These two things are connected. Yeah. I can't see in my lifetime some political change in the United States or in the Western governments where they finally realize that, no, we have to be morally consistent in terms of how we apply our values. It's going to have to come from within the region. It's not a coincidence when the Arab Spring broke out, the powers that be were panicking. There's a report that Netanyahu was on the phone with Obama dozens of times, don't throw Mubarak under the bus. Stand by him. Because there's a fear that if you have representative government in the region, they're going to say, well, look, it can't be business as usual. So I think, this is, I think, the objective reality that we're dealing with. Nobody wants to talk about it, but I think it's easy to blame the West and blame, what Israel is doing and to blame what European Union is doing. But at some point, we have to, critically analyze what's happening in our own region. And the level of complicity is actually much greater than I've just stated. There's a lot of things that I've just accidentally stumbled upon. I haven't really researched it in terms of the level of Muslim dictatorial complicity over what's happening to the people of Gaza. And I think at some point, it's going to necessitate somebody to write a doctoral dissertation on this to really sort of, expose what happened during this time period. And I think when the full details are out, when we get access to the archives, and when all of this information becomes part of the public domain, it's going to horrify anyone with a conscience.
Absolutely. I mean, I know this started with the conversation this whole conversation started when I sent out this article that was published, I think, by Ken Klippenstein that said UFOs are bombing Yemen.
Right.
Which demonstrated that the way that the Western media is talking about bombing, they really only mention, there are these bases that exist somewhere in the Middle East, in the region, but we know that these are actual Muslim countries that are the starting point where, the air bases that are, where the bombing is taking place from. And so your response was, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So I think it's
I mean, so just to cite one thing it's been written about and it's there in the public domain, but if you follow what's been happening in Gaza, the government of Jordan has been very outspoken, very critical, because they have their own Palestinian population, and the foreign minister has said a lot of great things that I agree with. One of the important insights that he made at some meeting, I think it was in Europe, where he said that one of the lessons of Gaza is that we realize that no one in this region can be secure unless the Palestinians are secure. That's what we know right now. But the same government of Jordan, who makes all these nice statements, has been using its own territory as a conduit for allowing the United States to send arms to Israel via Jordan. And so stop and think about that. Here we have a genocide taking place, and one country that's claiming to be a big defender of the Palestinians is using its territory to allow for weapons to be transported, to be dropped on the people of Gaza because of the nature of the government in Jordan and the relationship it has with the United States. And this is just, one element among many things. I think at some point when we get the internal documentation, we'll all know that all of these Muslim leaders, particularly in the Arab world, in private discussions with Secretary Blinken, were saying, we want Israel to win. Crush Hamas. It helps us stay in power. And then we can sort of extend the dictatorship in Ramallah to Gaza. We can maybe bring back this guy who's actually from Khan Yunis, if you know his name. He's quite a notorious person, Mohammed Dahlan. Who's basically this thug, who's from Khan Yunis. I think he's sort of the type of dictator that they want. He's very close with the Emiratis. He's got a lot of blood on his hands. And then Secretary of State Blinken can say, look, Palestinian self-determination. Dahlan is there. He's from Khan Yunis. He's running it. The Palestinians have a voice. Isn't this, absolutely wonderful? So this is how tragic the situation is. There's been very little criticism. I think what we do need, one of the absences, I think we do need good journalists to sort of at this stage go and investigate. I wouldn't be surprised if Kuwait is also, where there's an American base there, is also using its territory to allow for the transfer of weapons. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. I think when one sort of looks at it, and then hopefully at one point when we get full access and people who were involved in those meetings come and sort of, tell us the story, we'll see that this genocide that's happening in Gaza was happening because of the full participation of Muslim dictators. And what's so shocking is, when you take a step back and you look at sort of this story that you shared with me about the bombing of Yemen by American forces and by the complicitous role of all of these Muslim dictators, what strikes me as someone who studies this region is how very little has changed over the last 100 years. It's still the view in the major Western capitals is this is still our part of the world. We're going to appoint the dictators. We're going to appoint the despots. And anyone who stands up and say they want self-determination, we're going to clobber them.
Yep.
And this is, I think, part of the reason why there's so much antagonism toward political Islam, why there's this obsession with the Muslim Brotherhood, and of which Hamas is an offshoot, is they don't like popular organization and mobilization. What the Emiratis and the Jordanian royal family and other dictators fear is mass mobilization of citizens demanding accountability and demanding representation. And so, to the extent that they can crush that, they're going to do it. Like the Arab Spring, like I mean, in the case of Gaza, they hate the fact that there was an election in 2006, and this is part of the public record. The Emirati ruling family, Mohammed bin Zayed, will openly say to his European and American interlocutors, look what happens if you have an election. You're going to get the Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, that's enough to scare Westerners, because they think the Muslim Brotherhood, is sort of one step away from Nazism. And so that has a calming effect. Of course, better have dictatorship than have popular elections, because at the end of the day, we know that, that Arabs and Muslims can't make rational choices. And this is not my own words. This is actually, senior American diplomats, ambassadors have actually said this openly. I mean, to quote Madeleine Albright, she said at one point, what's often very scary is listening to Arab public opinion. And she was actually one of the better ones. I mean, if you know anything about secretaries of state, Madeleine Albright was actually, if you put them all together, was actually, much more, I think, thoughtful and nuanced and decent than people who occupied that position. So there's a lot to say. I have questions here that, I wanted to ask, Khalid about. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Some questions too.
Sure. So you tell me what we should do next.
Well, I think we should bring.
Khalid, any reactions to anything that I've said?
Or just so, I mean, what you said it so well, and I think it's very comprehensive, but I just want to underscore the whole intellectual paradigm, whether conscious or unconscious, that the West has had towards the Muslim world has been pretty much led by and directed by an obsessive fear of a Muslims united under a caliphate. When Europe entered into the 20th century, the ecstasy about the end of the caliphate, which Europe saw as basically equal to the end of the Muslim threat.
Yeah.
But this thing is that it was okay. So you end the caliphate, Turkey becomes a secular state. We meaning European colonial powers at the time, there were thoughts about the caliphate being claimed by or inherited by King of Jordan. There was thoughts about the Egypt becoming the caliphate. There were thoughts about the Ibn Saud becoming the Imam of all Muslims, sort of annexing Hijaz and declaring himself the Imam of all Muslims. And what is fascinating is that when you actually read the colonial record, is that there was a consistent and systematic involvement by colonial forces to suppress any attempt at, in fact, working into the consciousness of Muslims and non-Muslims that any such concept like the caliphate is by definition radical and extremist. that if you are talking about, so now the irony, and I've said this in many lectures and in many articles, the irony is that Europe acts like a caliphate.
Yeah.
We all know that if you dare attack a European state, you are at war with all European states. We all know that it's an attack against the United States means war with the United States and Britain and Canada. And
Yeah.
we all saw that in September 11, right? But that same logic, which the European colonizers basically allow themselves, the idea that, well, we are all one, and if we have a right to act as all one and have unified policy goals, it is not allowed for Muslims. And if Muslims think in terms of, and if organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood talk about Muslim ummah, Muslim unity, then by definition that becomes radical and becomes threatening, and by definition it becomes extremist. And so what during the colonial period in particular, diplomats of all ilk saw that the best way for colonial officials to work is not to deal with local chieftains and local diverse local interests, but in fact to simplify and flatten the complexity of a region, appoint a ruler over a very diverse and complex reality, for instance, the Hijaz versus Najd, and just deal with that ruler. And basically the entire population of Muslims are, in fact, de facto, the living dead. It's like, as you said, the scariest system is public opinion. But that, I think what we are seeing, there's a couple of very critical moments of transformation, I think, is that no one really, there was always the idea that, okay, there are these Muslims who go around talking about dreams of uniting, dreams of the ummah, dreams of, and there was always the sense that, well, our good, loyal, local thugs, the Arab rulers or the Muslim rulers, when all of that, let them talk, and then when it becomes serious, they'll arrest whoever they need to arrest, they'll torture whoever they need to torture, and they'll murder whoever they need to murder, like what happened with South Korea, for instance. And it will be okay. The Arab Spring fundamentally challenged that logic. Suddenly, it became that these Muslims are not just the living dead; they actually could be alive. But there are a couple of critical transformations at that point. After both 9/11 and the Arab Spring, the United States, which became the de facto, the colonial inheritor and the colonial head of the project, has reinstituted direct military presence all over the Muslim world. What people do not realize is that the number of American military bases all over the Muslim world is astounding. It is a colonial reality. No one talks in these terms, but it is a colonial reality. And these military bases exist only by direct arrangements with these despots. No one knows what the terms under which these it's not even, if you're an Egyptian or a Saudi or you're a Jordanian, there is no way you can find out what type of accommodations or what type of rules are given. It seems like pretty much impunity, that these American bases exist and they can do whatever. And part of that is that, okay, rulers, the deal is this: you do whatever you need to do to silence your people, and we make arrangements with you for our military bases to exist in the region so that we have now direct military access, preventing any possibility of what we see, what we deem to be some type of existential threat, a threat of Muslim unity or a threat of Muslim history.
Yeah.
I call it a threat of Muslim history, the rekindling of Muslim history. And so now we have underground forces underground that will, and we can intervene directly. And that's why it is top secret. No one knows. The arms are reaching Israel, including all the munitions, are going through Jordan, passing. Is there any way, can anyone verify whether these ships stop at Egyptian ports or cross the Suez Canal?
There was one report that I heard, unverified, that the Algerian government was preventing overflight of American military aircraft. Unverified,
but that's part of the problem. Is that
they're flying over Muslim airspace, right? Muslim countries' airspace.
But part of the problem is that you have it where the rulers that must enjoy absolute. Now, this creates a fundamental and inherent contradiction. That you are saying, we believe in universal human rights. We believe in the idea of self-determination, and in fact, the movement or the development in human rights is that idea that democracy is a human right, and that in fact, if denial of democracy is a violation of human rights, while you are saying this publicly, you are consistently, when it comes to the Muslim world, supporting in absolute impunity when it comes to how Mohammed bin Zayed deals with his people, with MPS deals with his people, with Sisi. We all know that after the fall of Mubarak, we all know Israel's role and Saudi's role, and the extent to which they pressured the US to support the Egyptian coup, and to support, and not only that, Israeli TV, I'll never forget, Israeli TV was ecstatically celebrating Sisi as a divine gift. And I'll never forget when this commentator in Israeli TV who said Sisi is more Zionist than you and me. You've heard this, I'm sure, right?
I mean, of course they're celebrating Sisi because he's been a loyal ally of Israel, right? Which I want to bring this back to Gaza because we're hopefully Muslims will listen to this.
I want to just say that part of this paradigm is that now that we have troops on the ground, the very idea of forces that resist, the idea of resistance, it's not just that it's not now that the caliphate is an extremist idea. It's not just that Islamist is an extremist idea. It's not just that sometimes political Islam is an extremist idea, but even the idea of resistance is an extremist idea.
It's criminal.
And that is why you can't say I'm a supporter of Hezbollah, or I'm a supporter of Hamas, or I'm a supporter of any movement that raises the idea of resistance, resisting colonial powers, resisting foreign powers, resisting the presence of American military bases. You are a radical and an extremist and a criminal if you say, I don't believe that Americans have a right to have military bases in Iraq till today. By definition, you're a persona non grata, you become a criminal, right?
On that point, I remember in the early days after October the 7th, after Hamas's attack, Dennis Ross, who's probably one of the most influential U.S. foreign policy officials that has shaped U.S. foreign policy toward the region and the Israel-Palestine conflict in particular, and happens to be at Georgetown University. I remember him giving an interview on CNN saying precisely the point that you made, that one of the goals here is that a message has to be sent that the type of resistance that Hamas has demonstrated against Israel and American interests has to be crushed. It's not about what Hamas actually represents, what their ideology is, but the idea that if you're going to demonstrate a model that organizing and mobilizing and pushing back against entrenched Western interests can be a successful one, then that example has to be crushed because God forbid it might, might become popular.
You know, one of Dennis Ross's teachers was Bernard Lewis, and one of his great intellectual influence.
I didn't know that, but I'm
Yeah.
not surprised, of course. Yeah.
But long before you had Dennis Ross saying stuff like that,
Yeah.
I remember Bernard Lewis in a conversation with him told me this. He told me this directly. The problem with the Muslim world, or the problem with Arabs, is that they have lost. It's just they've lost, and it is time to raise the white flag and surrender.
Yeah.
And as long as they, and he brought up, I mean, I thought it was obscene. Look, the Japanese surrendered, and that's why. Look at them; they are thriving.
Yeah.
They rebuilt after raising the
Yeah.
the white flag. The Germans surrendered, and look what happens. The Italians surrendered. Look what happens.
Yeah.
But the problem with you Arabs is that you don't realize. And by Arabs, he sometimes would mix between Muslims. Sometimes it's very Muslim. Sometimes is that you've lost, and you should just surrender.
Yeah.
It is amazing because he was saying this back.
Yeah.
This conversation took place in the 90s.
Yeah.
Early in the 90s.
Oh, it's a long-standing theme.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but then this is
Yeah.
where we get to the moment we are in.
Yeah.
And it started this idea started being pushed and floated that, listen, Palestinians are going to whine and complain, and so there's the Palestinian Authority, which has one of the most abysmal human rights records anywhere.
Yeah.
And they do a savage job of arresting and torturing and persecuting their own people.
Right.
Well, we're going to talk about the Palestinian Authority as fair and true representation for the Palestinians.
Mhm.
And we're going to whitewash the horrible human rights record, because this is directly in my human rights work.
Mhm.
We're going to whitewash and actually never really bring up how horrible Abbas's and people like Dahlan, who is in his group responsible for direct assassinations and numerous acts of torture and maiming, as I'm sure you know.
Mhm.
But so we're going to emphasize that Hamas has a horrible human rights record.
Yeah.
They're evil.
Yeah.
But the Palestinian Authority, well, they're true representatives of the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
And then the idea emerged after the Arab Spring that the Palestinian Authority can continue condemning annexations and condemning whatever they can, as long as they do what they're told. And I believe the big shift, the big, what do you call it, seismic movement, was actually the recognition of the annexation of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And the movement, because when you did that, and you saw that the Muslim world pretty much didn't react, because I was brought when I grew, when I was a political science student at Yale, I would remember, all the people, all the experts would say, if we do anything, the Muslim world will erupt, the caliphate will come back.
Yeah.
Well, they looked around and said nothing happened.
Yeah.
And when they realized nothing happened, said, well, the next step, okay, it makes perfect sense. As long as the Arab rulers, the Muslim rulers all over, accept Israel, normalize with Israel, that's what's important.
Yeah.
And we can simply ignore the acts of resistance, whether it's Hezbollah or Hamas or whatever they are, as pariahs of a pariah state or extensions of pariah state, Iran. We're going to just lump it all as an Iranian Persian phenomena, an extension of Persian fanaticism. These are not legitimate anything. These are just Iran making trouble. And the true enemy in the region is Iran.
Yeah.
And we are going to get, and this is why as genocide is being committed, genocide, that the word best, I don't know what words used, best or worst documented genocide in modern
Yeah,
history,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, in front of our eyes.
In front of our very
Yeah,
eyes,
yeah.
and beyond a shadow.
Yeah.
Do you know how many submissions were made to the International Criminal Court, and the same prosecutor that indicted Putin
Yeah,
overnight
yeah.
has done absolutely
Nothing,
zilch?
yeah.
And you know why, right?
Yeah, because he'll be removed if the court will be shut down.
Well, because the previous prosecutor,
yeah. Did nothing.
yeah,
Did nothing, yeah.
The
Yeah.
prosecutor before him
Yeah,
accepted
Yeah.
just a report calling for an investigation of crimes committed, war crimes committed
Yeah.
by the U.S. in Iraq.
Yeah.
The response of the Trump
Yeah.
administration was to declare members of the International Criminal
Yeah.
Court persona non gratis, and to basically say we are going to go.
Yeah.
We are going to, and there's people don't actually. I learned this from a relative of. I didn't know about this. That the relative of one of our students here showed me that Congress passed an act saying that if the U.S. is ever investigated for war crimes, the Congress authorizes the executive to invade The Hague. I can show you this act. It exists. It's actually a law. I read it.
physically.
It exists.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
passed by Congress.
Yeah.
No one. It's a law saying invade The Hague
Yeah,
if they dare indict any
Yeah.
Americans for war crimes.
Yeah.
So the logic here is astounding.
Yeah.
The logic
Yeah.
is okay. The human rights that we are interested in are human rights that don't cost us anything in terms of colonial interests. You want to talk about your rights to have sex with whoever you want, we're game. You want to talk about your rights to define your gender, fine. You want to talk about, as long as they're the type of rights that do not challenge colonial interests.
Yeah.
But if you talk about rights such as what we owe blacks in the US or what we owe Native Americans in the US,
Yeah.
that's extremism by definition, and not illegitimate in
Yeah.
quotes human rights issue. You want to talk about critical race studies, then you're a radical and an extremist, and so on. And so one of the immense moments in our modern history, you recall the establishment, the founding of Markaz I'tidal, the center in Saudi, in which you had Sisi, and had
The
his hand on
extremism,
the
the famous
yeah
orb, the orb,
exactly
meeting, that famous photo with
Sisi
Trump.
and Trump, and they're all
And MBS, I
their
think,
hands
yeah,
on
yeah.
the orb. Well, what do you know that Markaz I'tidal is extremely active?
I didn't know that.
People, I know
Yeah.
this is
Doing what? Doing what exactly?
Yeah.
Name for that?
I'tidal Center of Moderation.
Yeah, Center for Moderation.
Yeah. Now it is funded by millions of
I'tidal,
dollars.
Yeah.
They're extremely well funded. They are consistently active in quotes defining moderate Islam.
Yeah.
And so the literature and the lectures that are coming out of them, and the constant attempt to influence and ostracize and blacklist intellectuals in the US and in Europe who disagree, is that Hamas is not moderate Islam, Hezbollah is not moderate Islam, Iran is not moderate Islam. Moderate Islam is pretty much a certain type of Sufi Islam that calls for absolute and blind obedience to the ruler and a complete disinterest in politics. What sometimes is referred to as the new Abrahamic faith.
Yeah. The
Hamza
Yusuf
the
Islam.
Hamza Yusuf and
Yeah.
the Abrahamic, so many American politicians love
that. Yeah.
the Abrahamic
Accords.
Yeah. That's acceptable. Or Jami and Madkhali Islam. I listened to an amazing, astounding conversation on Israeli TV between 6 academics about what type of Islam do we want
Oh wow.
for the future of Israel. Israel, these academics were
Yeah.
saying, Israel is in a volatile and this is always their theme, a volatile and dangerous region. So, what type of Islam will keep us safe? And astoundingly, the 6 academics came to the conclusion that our friend is Jami or Madkhali Islam, the Islam that is funded and supported by Saudi and Markaz Atidal, that same
Yeah. Center.
center.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why? Because people don't realize this, but in Madkhali Jami Islam, which by the way is extremely influential in countries like Egypt and Jordan
Mhm.
and the US and France loves the Markaz Atidal Islam and so on, is that it is a religious duty to obey the Israeli authorities. It is haram.
Explicitly, they say that?
Explicitly in their literature. I can show you in Jami and Madkhali literature explicitly.
Wait,
Not
that
only that,
Muslims in Egypt and other parts of the Islamic world
No,
should or within Israel. You're
within
talking about.
Israel,
Within Israel, yeah.
Palestinians
Yeah, within
that
Israel.
exist, that the authority of Israel over the West Bank and
Yeah.
Gaza
Should not be questioned or
they're
challenged.
ashab al-shawka, as they
Yeah.
call it, the people of power.
Yeah.
And because
Yeah.
they're the people of power, they're God's will. And
Unbelievable.
because they're God's will, rebelling against them is haram.
Yeah.
And the only time it is halal to rebel against them is if the Wali al-Amr in Saudi, the ruler in Saudi, tells you it's okay to rebel
Oh my
against them.
God. Yeah.
But, and of course, it is similarly, even if the Egyptians help the Israelis murder down, because there's several times in the Madkhali Jami Egyptians that asked for a fatwa. What if we see the Egyptians basically help starve all 2 million Palestinians?
Mhm.
And the fatwa was time and time in the literature. And I'm one of the things I want to add to this library are the books of the Madkhalis and Jamis, but
Yeah.
it's unfortunately Saudi must like you.
Yeah.
To
To
get
get the
it.
books.
Because you get them free from
Yeah.
Markaz Atidal.
We'll work
They'll
on
send
that.
it to
We'll
you.
work on that. Get those books here. Yeah.
And the response was, even if all 2 million Palestinians perish, your religious obligation is to obey what the ruler tells you.
Is that explicit?
Explicit. The fatwa says even if the 2 million Palestinians perish,
Oh my God. Yeah.
it in printed in Arabic.
Yeah. And this is disseminated in Egypt.
This is disseminated everywhere from Markaz Atidal.
Oh my
People,
God.
Markaz Atidal is extremely active.
I had no idea.
They're very active on social media.
Yeah.
They have so many websites. They have armies. They call them, what do you call these armies, that the people that on Twitter?
Yeah.
Huh? Like, yeah, they're all like
Cyber armies.
Yeah, cyber armies.
Yeah.
If you say anything, like for instance,
They attack you.
on
Yeah.
Twitter,
Yeah.
or on social media or something, I've read some of the what Marcus Atadal is saying about me.
Mhm.
It is unbelievable. He's kafir, mulhid, zindiq, and all. But at the same time, there is never a situation in which you are to say, I support Palestinian rights because Wali al-Amr, the ruler, has not allowed you to do so.
Yeah.
So anyway, going back to the Israeli academics,
Yeah.
the Israeli academics, what amazed me about this discussion on Israeli TV is that they were very familiar with the literature of the Jamis and Madkhalis, and very familiar with Markaz Atizal, and very familiar with the fact that that center in Riyadh that was opened by Trump and the king is extremely active, and they were very intimate. They're constantly talking about the visits back and forth, and ideas exchange and so on. And he said, we agreed with we discussed this with our Saudi friends, and the type of Islam that Israel needs to survive in this dangerous region is Madkhali or Jami Islam. Any other form of Islam is a potential threat
Yeah.
to the safety and security of Israel. So this goes back to why what's
Mhm.
happening in Gaza is
Mhm.
happening.
Yeah.
Israel and the United States and all of Europe is making a point. You Muslims, the idea of you Muslims allowed any sense of unity, any
Yeah.
sense of ummah,
Yeah.
ummahism
Yeah.
is not allowed to you.
Yeah.
It is an absolute haram, and we'll do this, and your rulers will help us do this, and you are to watch and to remain silent and learn subordination
Yeah.
and learn to surrender.
Yeah.
2, we are obliterating the dangerous Islam. This started with 9/11, that we must engineer Islam,
Yeah.
moderate Islam.
Yeah.
We need, this is part of the growing pains, as the Israeli academics put. It said, there's a lot of people in prison. Yeah, we know a lot of people in prison in Egypt, and there's savage torture, in countries like Saudi. But these are the growing pains that these Muslims
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
to learn how to live with the Israelis, who are the civilizing force.
Mhm.
So the growing pains is this.
Yeah.
We butcher that type of
Yeah.
Islam, this
Yeah.
Islam that talks about what Cheyenne was talking about earlier, al-izzah,
Mhm.
dignity,
Yeah.
the Islam of al-Hussein, if you will.
Yeah.
And you accept a different type of Islam.
Basically, to remove any moral content from Islam, particularly any concept of justice, and create a subordinate version of Islam.
Yeah, I mean, like,
And make it
so
normative.
what type of what is the moral content
Yeah.
of Hamza Yusuf's Islam?
Yeah.
I really, because he has
Yeah.
so many followers, and so
Yeah.
many people say, don't refer to Hamza Yusuf, he's Sheikh Hamza.
Yeah.
Can someone tell me what is the moral content
Yeah.
of Hamza Yusuf's Islam?
Yeah. Well, his last statement on Gaza really forced him to take a hit, because it was such an embarrassing
it's
statement.
such an
But I think his stock has
embarrassing-
actually dropped a bit.
Hear what you said.
Yeah. He issued some sort of statement on the situation in Gaza that didn't mention Gaza, but it was just sort of a very bland, generic statement that didn't represent the reality. And I think maybe at the end of it, there was some reference to it's sort of like you have this mass atrocity taking place, and you claim to be an ethical person, but you don't talk about the horror show in front of you.
Yeah.
And then you claim this is Islam,
Yeah, he said that violence on all sides is wrong.
Yeah.
Atrocities on all sides
Yeah.
is wrong. We don't like violence. My heart cries for human suffering. But there is times where the best response to injustice
Yeah.
is just to accept it.
Accept it. Yeah.
And
Suffer in
and,
silence.
and
Yeah.
resist and
Yeah.
resistance causes greater harm.
Yeah.
And so it is clearly his fatwa is like the Jamis and Madkhalis, precisely.
Yeah, that's it.
And like Ben Baya, his teacher,
Yeah, his teacher, yeah.
that it is Muslims learn to shut up and just suffer in silence, and don't trouble us as we build military bases all over the Muslim world, as we use your airspace, as we use your water space, as we do whatever we want to do with your natural resources. As there was a deal between France and Egypt. You remember that deal that to prevent people from immigrating from Africa through the Egyptian desert to Libya.
Yeah.
And what was France doing with Egypt? They murdered 60,000 people in the desert.
Yeah.
And it came out by basically a single French journalist who exposed the fact that Egypt had this deal. The French military would give intelligence to the Egyptian army, and the Egyptian army would go. And I know kids who went to basically were driving, rich kids driving fast cars, in the sand dunes, and they got bombed.
Oh,
but
really?
they died.
It was that sort of indiscriminate, the bomb.
Yeah, the bomb was absolute and
anything that moved.
indiscriminate.
Yeah.
And it came out that this was a deal between the French and after it came out, no one knows till today whether it actually continues or was canceled. The French says, "Oh no, we've canceled it. Khalas." Yeah, 60,000 people died, but we're not going to do it anymore. But do we really know that? Can anyone ever verify that?
there's so many scandals that one day hopefully
Oh, it's
will be
called
revealed.
Project Sirli. This I remember. That
Yeah.
it's called Project Sirli. 60,000 killed.
Unbelievable.
So of course,
Yeah.
when they look at that, they say,
Yeah.
okay, so yeah, we killed
Yeah.
30,000 Palestinians.
Yeah.
Yani,
Yeah.
so what?
So
Yani, the Egyptians and the killed 60,000 of their
Yeah.
own people just in the desert, and
Yeah.
you're sitting there and making
complaining,
a big deal.
Yeah.
And so you just got you're anti-Semitic, because if you weren't anti-Semitic,
Yeah.
you
would be saying something about this.
yeah, you would just leave Israel
Yeah.
alone,
Yeah,
because
why are you
Israel
picking
is the
on
only.
Israel?
Yeah, exactly. Why are
Yeah.
you picking on Israel?
Yeah.
Look, you guys kill millions of one another, and every time I've engaged Israeli quote unquote intellectuals, because
Mhm.
I don't, their argument is always, well, you guys don't know, you don't have human rights, you don't
Yeah.
have democracy, you
Yeah.
don't really have, you kill each other all the time.
Yeah.
So
That's
what's the big deal
yeah.
that we are
doing a little bit of
trying?
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we didn't do it, you probably do it to each other. So it is the complicity. I call it a satanic complicity.
Yeah.
It's a devilish to rip the soul of Islam as any type of ethical moral guide
Yeah.
or a moral force in humanity. So basically, the only religious alternatives that would remain would be Christian movements
Yeah.
and some Jewish influence. But Islam is goodbye.
Yeah.
Hinduism is limited to India. Buddhism is cute because it's been all
Yeah.
co-opted and westernized, and
Yeah.
nothing like the Buddhism of Myanmar. Okay, we don't like that, but
Yeah.
the Buddhism that you find in centers all over the
Yeah.
U.S. and teach you how to
Yeah.
breathe and how
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
That's all cute and that's all fine.
Yeah.
That's the reality we live in,
Yeah.
and I wish we just would stop the BS and just
Acknowledge
speak
it.
truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why your work is so important, Khalid, is because I think you are trying to preserve and enhance this type of ethical Islam. And you're one of the few people who can do it, which is my next big question that I want you to reflect on. And you're one of the few people who can answer the question, because it's a question that is about Islam, its moral content, its tradition, and the human rights crisis that we're facing and seeing right now in many places in the Islamic world, but critically in Gaza, right, which is the big event. So the big question is the following, and take some time, because there's no easy answer to this question. It's the following question: what is the Muslim ethical responsibility during a time of genocide? So that's the big question I want you to think about. But I think more specifically, because I think most of the people watching us are American Muslims, or let's say Western Muslims. What is the American Muslim sort of moral responsibility during this moment of mass murder in Gaza?
The irony, although as you know, the accused of everything from being a Shia to a Mu'tazili to a Muslim Brotherhood but actually I'm quite literal, quite a literalist, when the Prophet ﷺ teaches us that Muslims should be like a single body, and quite a literalist about all the garbage about the Shia having a secret Quran, and their taqiyya, and the level of disgust that I feel at how colonialism has deepened the sectarian divides, and then gloated over how backwards we are.
Yeah.
So what is the moral response? What is your moral responsibility?
Yeah.
First is to look within and realize that any reinforcement or support of sectarianism, you are supporting the colonial project. You are supporting the genocidal project. If you sit there and you are talking about oh well, maybe Hezbollah is doing whatever, but they're Shia, and so whatever they do doesn't count, or whatever help they try to do to lend, or the reason Hamas is evil because they accepted arms, because this is one of the very, very popular arguments used by Markaz Atidal,
Oh,
is that Hamas is evil because they accepted help from the Shia. If they were true Muslims, they wouldn't have accepted help from the Shia. Of course, Markaz Atidal, every time people on Twitter and so on say, well, that's because they couldn't find, no one else would help them. You get blasted about, oh, no, so the Saudi help. You just don't realize how much Saudi has helped and Saudi has done. So if you are in that mindset, you are part of the genocidal problem.
That's a good point.
Okay. Second, as you said, you live in a country that is directly responsible for the genocide, not some type of indirect complicity, but direct involvement, because all the killing is done with American-made ammunition. It is American factories that are building the stuff. It is American engineering, American ingenuity. It is American money. It is being said, and so you have a direct moral responsibility to get involved politically in whatever way. I mean, for the first time, go learn how to lobby. Go learn how to hire a lobbying organization and to buy a politician. If that's what you need to do, Muslims should start buying politicians. If that's what we need to do.
To stop a genocide.
To stop a genocide. So that is number two. Number three, you must realize that ethical and moral commitments, like human rights, commitments to human rights, are indivisible. You can't play favorites. You can't say genocide against Palestinians is bad, but genocide against some other group may be okay. You can't say, well, human rights is okay if it basically is limited to limited to extrajudicial killings, so you don't basically assassinate men or imprison social men. But when it comes to, for instance, the human rights of women, of autonomy over their bodies, or gender identity, if you're going to make distinctions, you better think about your distinctions very carefully, and they have to be coherent and systematic. And consistent, because if they're not, you're undermining the very paradigm that is causing the genocide. And so part of my response is that we Muslims are directly responsible for this genocide. How? Because we saw the rape camps in Bosnia. Remember? We lived through the rape camps in Bosnia, and what happened? We've been aware of the genocide taking place in China. And nothing. And we continue buying Chinese products and continue flying to China and nothing. We continue doing things like genocides is going on in Myanmar and going on in China. And let's be truthful. We racially distinguish between genocides that really offend us and genocides that don't really offend us. Well, it doesn't work that way, my brother. And also, in addition to that you can't play favorites with, you can't be truly a force against genocide if your Islam, the extent of your Islam, is how to cover up women or how to. So I mean, there's a very respectable scholar, Palestinian scholar. You know who I'm talking about. I'm not gonna name her for an obvious reason. She's an intellectual force, by all measures. And I'm talking to this Muslim imam, and he just, my brother, I saw her once, and there was cleavage. I blew my top. You are responsible for the genocide. You are part of the genocidal problem. It's her business. That's your problem, is that you're going to erase her intellectual contribution because she's showing. And in fact, why are you looking? Why? How do you know she's showing cleavage? Actually, I've never noticed any cleavage on this woman at all. So what is it that you were looking and staring at? That is part of the genocidal mentality.
Yeah. Well,
Nader, these are very serious. Unless we
moral failings.
yes,
Moral
unless we
failings, yeah.
radically change the way we deal with Allah, with God, and with our tradition, and so I've been recently involved because I teach human trafficking, and I've been doing it for years, and recently involved with several situations in which I'm helping traffic people. For the vast majority of Muslims, the litmus test is, oh, she's being used in sex business. She's promiscuous. It's canceled as a human being. No interest.
Yeah, terrible. Yeah.
But didn't Allah say that that liberating someone from slavery is your passage to Allah's bliss? Yes, but Allah was talking about slaves that they bought in the market in Mecca. They weren't talking about these girls. And anyway, modern slavery is not really slavery. This is from Jonathan's book.
Right.
His last chapter in his book, he argues that the modern slavery is a myth because it's not really slavery at all.
Oh my God.
I actually I assigned that last chapter to my human trafficking class because and I asked them to write an analysis.
Yeah.
And I mean, let's leave it there.
Let's leave it there. Yeah. Just on the point of moral and ethical consistency about Muslims, I have this litmus test that I use when I engage with Muslims in the context of a conversation about Gaza and Muslim ethics. And I often cite the hypothetical example because I'm very worried about the politics of tribalism, that many Muslims are supporting the Palestinians simply because they're majority Muslim. And I'm saying, look, the reason why we support the Palestinians and we're outraged over what's happening in Gaza is not because they're majority Muslim, but because they're victims of a gross injustice.
Exactly.
And so I said, the hypothetical sort of moral litmus test for Muslims is hypothetically think about a different case where in the context of a closed area, let's call it the Gaza Strip, instead of 2.3 million Muslims living there, half of them children, let's say it was 2.3 million Jews living there.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
It was Muslim armies surrounding it, keeping it under siege, bombarding it. And some people living in that concentration camp broke out of the Gaza Strip and they attacked and they committed atrocities against the surrounding Arab and Muslim army. And then that Muslim army attacked, trying to get retribution over the 1,200 people who were killed.
Let's assume this hypothetical. The Muslim army said,
what position would you?
The Muslim army said, you dare kill Muslims? We are going to teach you what happens to those who kill Muslims.
And so we're going to commit a genocide against those impoverished Jews that have been living under a siege for 60 years. Whose side would you be on? Sadly, I think the answer for many Muslims is they would either be confused over what to do, or they would adopt the position that we see many supporters of Israel taking right now.
I have increasingly become extremist. For me, if you are morally confused, you're not a Muslim. That's the position. You are not a Muslim anymore. You might think you're a Muslim, but you don't know what this message that was sent with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was about. I'm going to tell you something, and I was saving it to khutbah, maybe, but no, I'm going to say it. There was a video that I saw what showed 3 Israeli captives. They were young men, and they're smiling and they're talking and they're eating and they're playing a card game. And then in the video, it switches to their dead bodies because they were killed in an Israeli bombardment, right? I cried. I cried because they're human beings and they looked happy and they looked healthy. And they looked vibrant, and now they're dead. And I don't care whether it's really. What I care is the atrocity that was committed. And yes, And when I see what happened, same with Palestinian victims, I cry.
Yeah.
If you can't deal with that,
Yeah.
and you say, "Oh, you're crying over Israeli
Yeah.
soldiers," you're crying. That's your problem.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I mean, that's a corruption of Muslim ethics if you can't sort of figure that out. But, unfortunately, not everyone, unfortunately, the Islam that we have grown up with is the Islam that puts us in a particular mental state that avoids the type of ethical Islam that you've been writing about and preaching about. So when you say that you would dismiss Muslims who are confused, I'm a little bit more charitable, because if you're raised in anywhere in the Muslim world, the Islam that you're exposed to is the Islam of this moderation center in Saudi Arabia, right? That's the dominant theme.
Yeah, but my involvement with the Quran and the message of the Quran and the whole tafsir project, and realizing what this book was really, how this book engaged the historical moment and altered the moral, ethical consciousness of people. It's very simple. Either you understand what the message of the Quran was about, or you don't.
Yeah. So that's why the work of the Usuli Center is so important, because this type of ethical Islam, in the review that I did of your book, Reasoning with God, I called you the leading Muslim ethicist of our era. And that's just an objective fact. It's not my personal opinion.
It's very funny, because I have one of my students, again, because Muslims are so kind and so nice, referring to my work, saying, Khalid Abu Fadl, he's not considered in the field of ethics. He's not an authority at all in the field of ethics.
That's what they said?
Yeah.
Well,
and this is where does this guy teach? He was the guy that dealt with your essay. Well, and he's very well known academic, Muslim academic. Yeah, Muslim academic.
Yeah. Well,
so I won the award from the American Academy of Religion
for your contributions.
Yeah, and no Muslims. I got a lot of congratulations from all time. No Muslims.
No Muslims. Yeah. Because we're talking about Muslim complicity in what's happening in Gaza, there was a report that came out yesterday that I wanted to bring to your attention and to the attention of those people listening, because it just reminds us that these are the dark days of Islam, dark days of Muslim history. So yesterday, a report was published by the Uyghur Human Rights Project, and it's called 20 Years for Learning the Quran, Uyghur Women and Religious Persecution. And basically, the report documents, after getting access to these files from the Chinese police archives, that many elderly women, some over the age of 80, have been detained and imprisoned for religious learning that took place 20 or 30 years previously, often when the accused was 5 or 6 years old. Many sentences were made retrospectively for crimes such as studying the Quran or wearing the hijab committed before the practice was banned by China. 91 women from a single county in Xinjiang province were detained because they were officially registered as female religious leaders. And the detention and the imprisonment of female religious leaders and the criminalization of children's religious socialization is leading to the destruction of these religious communities, particularly of Islam. And when I was looking through the report, you read things like, these women are being imprisoned and punished for the crime of learning a few verses from the Quran during their childhood. And of course, so this is happening in China, and it's been happening for a very long time. And the report came out yesterday, but I'm willing to bet every cent that I own that not one Muslim country or organization that claims to be Muslim is going to say anything about this.
I can tell you that Uyghur Muslims, the Muslim Uyghurs in the U.S. and so on, who've created organizations, they are extremely bitter about the how the non-reaction. They're extremely bitter, and I don't blame them.
Yeah.
And they say basically we don't count
Yeah.
because we're Chinese, and you don't consider Chinese
That's
to
most.
be part of the Muslim equation.
Yeah. I know that.
And I mean that's what that is what makes me feel. Yani, can you imagine if the Prophet, if he was alive?
Yeah.
Can
What
you
is-
imagine? Can you imagine what
Yeah.
his reaction would be to these things?
Yeah.
And then somehow we talk about an Islam which excludes the hypothetical of what if the Prophet was alive.
Yeah.
People want to convince me that if the Prophet was alive, he would care about whether women in Iran are wearing the what is it called,
Chador?
shador.
Yeah.
Whether they're wearing the shador, far more as opposed to the amount of obscene and disgusting sexual slavery that goes on in Iran.
Yeah.
Well documented. The amount of sexual trafficking in Iran is shocking, and sometimes these mullahs who enforce the laws of shador, and we have to become very honest. If we are going to move beyond the misery of this historical moment, a lot of the imams and mullahs, both Sunni and Shia, has nothing to do with whether you're Sunni Shia, are involved in sexual trafficking in Iraq, are involved in sexual trafficking in Egypt, are involved in sexual trafficking in Saudi, are involved in sexual trafficking in Iran. And then they come and talking about whether a woman wears a shador or not. Frankly, I do not. I've come to the point where I don't want to hear it. I don't want to even. I'm not going to waste time talking about these things anymore.
Yeah, they don't matter. Before I forget, I know you're working on this new project on sort of the Islamic ethics of human trafficking, and so this is a perfect fit for the center that I'm now directing. So maybe when you have a moment when you want to launch an event, promote the event, we can use our center in Georgetown to sort of, create a launch event, a panel discussion, something like that. So keep that in mind. So that's point number one before I forget.
And I would actually like to bring some of the liberated women to speak.
Oh, that'd be great. Oh, you're in touch with them?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, that'd be great.
I did that, and it was great success when I was teaching the course in Los
wonderful.
Angeles,
Muslim
including
women, right?
No,
Other women,
normal human beings, including a woman, Clarissa, who was trafficked, was liberated, and attended UCLA Law School and graduated from UCLA Law School.
Wow, amazing,
And she came and spoke to my class. She actually wrote a book about her experience too.
Oh, wow.
But also, one of the things that I insisted in teaching the class is to give a voice to the survivors. And so if we get involved in something like this, what I would want is to bring some survivors to speak for themselves.
Love to do it. We can hopefully cover the cost. At my old institution, we had a human trafficking clinic that would focus on this and teach students, because students would come to that program. I'm not sure if they have something in Georgetown. We'll find out. They can co-sponsor the event, but let's stay in touch about that. The other more important thing, though, is that I want this to be recorded, and I want sort of just to say this in public. Please, Khalid, take care of your health, because you really, really are. You've said this. People have said this to you before, but you are, 1 in a million. When there's this tradition in Islam that every, 100 years, a great reformer comes and tries to sort of remind Muslims of their ethical responsibilities and reorient Islam back into an ethical direction. It's not an exaggeration to say that the man sitting beside me, certainly falls into this category. So nothing would make, I think, the dictators of the Muslim world more happy to know that something happened to your health. So if the anger toward despotism is a reason for you to sort of, take care of your health because you don't want to give MBS, who's probably the worst of the lot, any satisfaction, let that be a motivating factor for you. I mean, there's a lot of enemies that you have. So I think this is morally unaccompanied. Luckily, you have a wonderful wife here who takes good care of you. You have a lot of, you have, 2 sons, and you have a lot of friends and supporters.
I mean, in her, yes, she takes good care of me, but I'm very difficult. I mean,
I'm sure you are.
Yeah.
I'm sure you are. I'm sure you are. But, we need you here for the long haul, because, these are the dark days of Muslim history, right? And we're going to need people who can, I think, navigate this terrain and sort of shed some light on, what ethical Muslims should be doing during this moment of deep trauma, not just in Gaza, not just in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs, but in many other parts of the world, including here in the United States. Because
go ahead. Where the next crisis is coming, and it's coming very quickly, is in India.
In India.
Yeah.
In India's, there's these monitoring groups that monitor where the next genocide or a country that's in a pre-genocidal state. But you said India. I thought you were going to say something much more closer to home. We're living in an election year. And unfortunately, Donald Trump looks like he has a good chance. Who would have thought?
Yeah.
And then God help us if Donald Trump, with all of his Islamophobic advisors, come back into power. If this moment is difficult, the second iteration of Donald Trump, with all of his deeply bigoted political appointees, that's going to make life very difficult for us.
Nader, this is why I try to remind myself that maybe have righteous anger instead of just outrage. A lot of my righteous anger is directed at wealthy Muslims, because my experience in the United States is that most Muslims, also the Quran teaches one of the essential and critical lessons of the Quran is you cannot hoard money, and money must circulate.
The principle of zakat, right?
It's not just zakat. It is sadaqah and zakat and the khums. That you must circulate money. You can't
hoard it.
But Muslims hoard money, and they are extremely stingy. And compared to other groups, their stinginess is shocking. And even when they're not stingy, they give the money to all the wrong causes. They truly, to them, if you are someone who has a doctorate from University of Toronto, a distinguished professor in this university, to them you're suspect. No, I'm going to go find someone who trains chaplains and gives them $3 million to create some center to train Muslim chaplains, whatever that means. But I'm not going to give it to, you remember our friend, the author of Faith for All.
Shabir Akhtar.
Shabir Akhtar.
Who passed away, by the way.
Passed away,
I
know.
Allah yarhamu. I was very sad by that because he was a friend.
But I remember that someone, this was a long time ago. It was a very wealthy Muslim in LA who had given to Bayan and given to University of Irvine and given to all types of things. And then I was giving an example of how we have intellectuals are worthy of support. Right? That was my point. So I was mentioned Shabir Akhtar. And one of the brother, I heard that he has dangerous ideas. And so I said to him, I said, any intellectual worth anything must have dangerous ideas. If they don't have dangerous ideas, then they're not worth anything. If they don't produce things that shock you and say, what is this? If you get out of them, if you get 50% that is you agree with, then alhamdulillah, you're lucky. No, brother. And it stayed with me because the man passed away. And Shabir Akhtar was all his intellectual acumen. And I do believe he was a major contributor. He was, He did it by himself. With no, and he completely, Muslims are oblivious to his existence and to his impact and to his literature and to his work.
Just an update on him that you probably don't know. In the last years of his life, he was at Oxford. And he got a position at Oxford because he was able to get private funding from some people who liked his work and was subsidizing his professorship.
Was this Muslims?
No, non-Muslims. Because his area, so there you go. So his area of specialization, and this is where Shabir was brilliant, and he was actually very unique. He was actually, I think, much more an expert in early Christianity, and he knew Greek, Latin.
Yeah,
His Arabic was pretty good.
do you know-
German, he taught himself
Do
German.
you know how valuable a
Yeah.
Muslim intellectual
Yeah.
who is an expert in early Christianity is?
He's, I think, one of the few people, and I've seen him debate and engage with people at that level of intellect who are also specialists in early Christianity, and he could hold his own.
No,
How many Muslims do we have then?
We don't.
Yeah,
we
we
don't.
don't. Yeah.
And even the command of these languages. I
Yeah.
mean, if a true Muslim
Yeah.
intellectual these days cannot be limited to English and Arabic.
Yeah, you have to go
Or
beyond.
you must if you are truly
Yeah.
truly an intellectual that's going to leave an impact.
Yeah.
Depending on your field, but languages, linguistic skills is a must, including things like Greek
Yeah.
and Latin and
Yeah.
Syriac and
Yeah.
Coptic.
Yeah.
Coptic and Syriac.
If you want to know the early
Yeah.
Christianity, you have to know those languages.
And
Yeah.
you want to know
Yeah.
the context of the Near East and the
Yeah.
development of the Near East and,
Yeah.
and how Islam came into the Near East and be able. But the more these Muslims, if the more a Muslim is trained and nuanced intellectually,
Yeah.
the more the wealthy avoid them.
Yeah.
And I've had this experience over and over and over.
Yeah.
The minute I've had people introduce me. Oh, Khadam Fadl, he went to Yale, Princeton, and it's like, oh, mashallah, mashallah. Then I discovered that actually these names convince them not to support you.
Yeah. Also, what I've noticed is many Muslims who have wealth, their moral commitments to fund an Islamic project or an Islamic school is very shaky. So they'll find interest in you, but if someone whispers in their ear, "Oh, that Khalid Abul Fala has said X, Y, and Z," okay, that's enough.
It happened.
We
to me.
run away.
It happened here.
Just one rumor.
Yeah,
Oh,
just
really?
one guy said, "Oh, I'll support. I'll fund."
And of course, the person
and of
hasn't read
course-
anything by you, right?
Of course, and
It's just the rumor is enough.
and well, once he got
To
back
jump ship.
to the rumor mill,
Yeah.
he ran away. Because of course the rumor mill is Shia, Mu'tazili,
Yeah.
Ikhwani, Batihi, Romani, all the Eid.
Unfortunately, the khutbah today didn't help sort of, I think, in that area because it's going to be used against you. But
I am very, I fully, but for everyone who had listened to Shayan's khutbah, Khalid Abul Fadl fully endorses what Shayan said in his khutbah. I fully believe that what Shayan said about Hussein's example, and that there are two Islams. There's the Islam that represented by Sabt al-Rasul, by the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, and the family of the Prophet, including the numerous examples of Ali al-Bayt, Imam al-Hussein, and there's that Islam, and then the Islam of power and institutions,
the Umayyad
and
dynasty,
the Umayyads and empires.
Yeah.
And that is the Saudi Islam, the Emirati Islam, and you have to choose. If you're a Muslim, educate yourself about the example of the Hussein.
So on that point, I'm going to raise something that we've talked about here, and is, I'm going to be a troublemaker here. I want to get your opinion because we're talking about Muslim complicity from a leadership perspective. But I have to say that for all we know about what the Saudis do and what the Emiratis do, I mean, in our sacred space in Mecca, Medina, I really cringe and am upset and hurt every time I see all of these fellow Muslims sharing their pictures on social media of their wonderful trips to Mecca.
Yeah.
And it just, when you talk about how ethics and human rights is indivisible, how can you know what the Saudis are doing and still give your money
to them,
and go? And I mean, it's like...
On that point, you just reminded me, I wanted to organize a panel discussion with Khalid and maybe one or two other people on this exact issue, that given the nature of the Saudi regime, given what they're doing with that wealth, that a lot of it comes from the Hajj pilgrimage, that there could be, or there should be, a moral argument where, at least for this phase of Muslim history, going and fulfilling your obligation should be set aside because it's contributing to all of this corruption.
It tragically, I don't know, tragically, what is the word I'm looking for? I can't even say funny because it's not really funny, but
it'd be funny if it wasn't so tragic.
Yeah. So there were 60 scholars in Libya that got together and they signed a fatwa saying that in light of what the Saudis are doing in Yemen and the support they're giving Haftar
Mhm.
and
In Libya,
and,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
the abuses committed by
Yeah.
the Haftar forces in Libya, and in light of the money and the support of the Saudis and in what they're doing in Sudan
Yeah.
and what they did in Egypt, it is haram to go on to Umrah on Hajj.
Yeah.
Okay, so this group was in Libya. There was another group in Yemen. There were about 40 scholars who also issued the fatwa.
Mhm.
Do you know that half of these scholars are now killed because the response was whether it's the Emiratis or the Saudis, we don't know, but the response was to put a hit,
Oh, deliberately targeted,
to
assassinated.
assassinate
I
the
didn't know that.
imams that signed this petition.
Yeah.
Half of them are dead,
Yeah.
and they were, and the family, the people, a lot of testimonies that the people doing the killing were U.S. special forces, ex-military,
Yeah.
that basically are hired as
Assassins.
mercenaries,
On
assassins.
that point, just last week, the BBC documentary was produced that investigated precisely this topic, not against the scholars, but they discovered one journalist, and it's a 1-hour documentary that's on YouTube that investigated the case of assassinating dissidents in Yemen.
Yeah.
At the behest of the UAE,
I was just
hiring
going to
American
tell you-
mercenaries. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
should watch
but,
it.
I will
Yeah.
because, but
Human rights activists.
I was just
Yeah.
going to tell you that the 40 Yemeni scholars,
Yeah.
shockingly, we are close to. I think I don't. It's over 35 of them. There were 40. I think 40 something. But most of them, what remains is a handful, were all killed by Emirati hired assassins.
Yeah.
So what do you do when you have fatwa in which people
Yeah.
get the courage to sign these fatwa and then pay for their life
Yeah.
while we sit in the U.S. and Europe and so on,
Yeah.
and be oblivious and think,
Yeah.
well, oh no, it's really cool. Let's organize Hajj and Umrah.
Yeah.
And I know some people
Yeah.
who I think of them as they should be good moral people, but I see them every year organizing Hajj and Umrah.
Well, see, this is the problem.
visits.
The crisis of Muslim ethics is so severe that if you or me, I mean, I'm nobody, but if you were to go or write something and try and convince Muslims that, look, for very good moral reasons, Islamic reasons, you should not go to Hajj for the foreseeable future, you would, what are you saying?
Yeah, I mean,
Have you lost your mind?
Exactly.
I mean, who's paying you to say? Is it? Are you? Oh, he's must be getting. Is it out there? Okay,
Yeah.
Not the fatwa,
But
you
the
know, we talked
conspiracy
about this
theories,
in,
yeah.
in the tafsir.
Yeah.
And we've cut excerpts.
Yeah.
Where that's exactly what he says.
Yeah.
And also points to fatwa from our history
Yeah.
that support when
because there were actually examples
or it's happened before.
Islamic
Oh,
history,
interesting.
yeah.
See, people, I didn't know that. But to try and disseminate that idea, even to an educated audience, let's say, I mean, American Muslims are highly educated, right? It wouldn't register.
No, and one of the reasons that people very successfully malign me to wealthy supporters, potential supporters, is exactly this.
Oh yeah.
Oh, did you know that he's negating the fifth pillar of Islam?
Oh, yeah. So he's come up with his new interpretation of Islam.
What's really interesting though is that I've had many conversations with people who follow our work who just arrive at this themselves. That even before they hear it from us, they don't feel comfortable with that idea, and I think that they're very happy to hear someone
validate that instinct.
Of professional caliber. But the thing is, okay, so we're not talking about a critical mass of people, and a lot of people just don't have the bravery. I mean, if you know that the second largest contributor to their wealth is Hajj and Umrah, okay, but this is boycott. This is what else are you going to do? Because what else can the regular Muslim do?
Yeah.
to make a difference. You go
Yeah.
straight to the source and
Yeah.
look at what they've done to turn Mecca into Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Like, what would
Yeah.
the Prophet think if
Yeah.
he were alive today and
Yeah.
saw what's become of Mecca?
Yeah, I think our moral obligation, more your moral obligation, because I'm a nobody in this debate, is to lay out the Islamically valid argument over why going to Hajj at this moment in time is undermining, the message of Islam at its core. Most Muslims are not going to get it, but I think making the argument, hopefully one day in the future, will be picked up and will resonate, and hopefully it'll disseminate. Hopefully by then the Saudi royal family will no longer be there. But
Whenever
I think
they're ready to check
Mecca,
out,
Yeah.
Mecca and Medina would be
Yeah.
liberated.
Yeah.
That-
I mean, so
that-
this is, I think, the responsibility that you have, and that the Asuli Institute, I think, really has in
Yeah,
terms of
it's
sort of
out
these.
there.
But I think there's people like I think there's I've heard this idea before. It does resonate among some people, and of course, what's so tragic about the Hajj pilgrimage is that inbuilt into the moral requirements of Islam is this wonderful idea that Muslims around the world annually gather
Yeah.
to come together,
Unity.
to meet each other, to talk. I mean, theoretically, I mean, to get to know each other, to talk about the
Yeah.
problems in the world, to come up
to
with
get
solutions.
beyond ethnicity, beyond class.
Exactly. I mean, the
That's-
idea, the potential, the ethical sort of inherent value of that inbuilt form of one of the core pillars of Islam, the potential good that could come out of that if there was a Hajj possibility where Muslims would not be living in a police state, right?
Oh, and the Saudis have very successfully
Yeah.
turned Hajj into a Las Vegas
Yeah.
shopping.
Yeah. Extravaganza.
Yeah, I mean,
Also a
Yeah.
tap for political dissidents, right?
yeah,
People,
but,
the Chinese that come there.
yeah, they get turned.
Yeah.
know,
and-
Many
and-
Uyghurs
and-
have been-
and several,
yeah,
some
yeah, sent back,
large
yeah.
number of Egyptians
Yeah,
were
yeah.
arrested, and,
Yeah.
even including Egyptians who were American citizens.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Sent to Egypt.
They
Yeah.
turned over to Egypt,
Yeah.
and the Saudis say, yeah, but there's a criminal complaint by Egypt says that there is a conviction in absentia,
Yeah.
and they must stand trial in Egypt. This is our obligation under international law. Of course,
Yeah.
there's not.
We have an extradition treaty with our brotherly country, Egypt.
Yeah, and
We have to-
then
yeah.
we send them to Egypt, and then the U.S. can talk to the Egyptian
Egypt, yeah.
government about freeing them. Of
Yeah.
course, I knew several Americans now who have been
Yeah.
imprisoned after being turned over by the
Oh,
Saudis
wow.
for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Now we'll talk about 4 or 5, and the American government.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. They say, "Oh, we're trying our best,"
Yeah.
but I don't believe for a second that they're trying their
Yeah.
best.
I mean, the Senator Menendez scandal.
Oh yes.
So
yes.
I mean, he's
Yes,
he's
yeah.
collaborating with the Sisi regime and their lobbyists
Yeah.
as the head of the Foreign Relations Council committee to sort of and apparently if you follow the details, there was all of this cash that was found in
Yeah.
his money in his home, like thousands and thousands of dollars of money that he was just given to do Sisi's bidding. So this is why I'm convinced that there's not going to be any shift in American policy toward the Islamic world unless the United States cleans up its own democracy, for which U.S. foreign policy is probably the most undemocratic component, because policy is not made based on what people have to say. Policy is made based on, lobbyists and based on arms manufacturers and based on sort of, we have no democratic control over what's,
But thank God we
Yeah.
have a Congress that can
Yeah.
that can authorize the invasion of the Hague. And,
There you go. Yeah.
yeah.
So these things are deeply connected. And
Alhamdulillah.
but
you
look,
know,
I think we've
yeah,
tired you out. I don't want to.
Been 2
Yeah,
hours.
yeah, it's been 2 hours.
yeah,
So I'm hoping that nothing that I said is going to haunt me when I go back to Washington
I-
D.C.
I-
But you
I-
never know; these are dark
but
times.
everyone must know
Yeah.
that it's not Nader's fault. If he said anything
Yeah.
that will haunt him, it is really my fault,
Okay,
because
good.
I've
thank you for owning that.
I've actually, Nader, I didn't tell you this. I put something in your water that has really. I don't know if you've noticed
Thank
that
you.
you're very.
I'm feeling a
woozy,
bit. I'm feeling a bit
Yeah.
dizzy. So
and
I-
I knew that. I
thank you
just
for
needed
thank
to-
you for
No,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
thank
No,
you
no,
for
not truth,
saying that. No, these are difficult times, but it's always an honor to come here. And I want to really emphasize, Khalid, that the last Jummah khutbah you gave, we were all watching it, and many of us were worried that this is going to be, it's going to put you in the hospital. So I'm asking you to sort of, please take extra care of your health, because it's not just about you and your family. It's about the cause now. It's about the future of an ethical interpretation of Islam. There's very few people that are doing what you're doing, and Grace and your friends and family are doing. And so we need you around for the long struggle, the long haul. Inshallah.
Inshallah. I'll try.
Well, thank you,
Okay.
everybody. As always, these conversations are, they go by in 2 seconds.
They do. They went by
and
very
they're
quickly.
Really, really important, really powerful. I want to thank you for coming and sharing, your wisdom with us, and the incredible question about what is our responsibility. I'm really excited and really proud about the work we do here at Asuli, because we're not funded by anyone other than the donors that believe in what we're doing, and I think people understand that.
Can I tell Nader something he doesn't know, but it's a little bit embarrassing? When I had just finished at Princeton, there was a job opportunity at the center that you now lead.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I applied.
Yeah.
I didn't even get into the shortlist.
Oh, really? Wow.
So
It was in the same school, same department?
yes, it was exactly. Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't even make it
Well,
to the shortlist.
yeah.
So I just want you to know that your people,
Yeah.
about 30 years ago,
Yeah.
not just rejected me,
Yeah.
but didn't even give me the opportunity to give a job talk.
Yeah.
And I could have been a professor in your center now, next to Jean Vol and
Yeah.
and I think Yvonne Haddad was there at the
She was there
time.
at the time, yeah.
People all retired, and what's her name, Laba, who's
Tamara San.
Tamara
San has retired, yeah.
retired.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I could have been there, but you guys,
You know what?
you didn't want me.
It's Georgetown's loss, definitely, but the good part of the story is that it ended up well for you and your family. UCLA benefited immensely, and the law school benefited immensely, despite the attacks that keep coming your way. But I think this is part of the challenge that we're facing right now. These are dark and difficult days, and the fact that you get attacked by this Center for So-Called Moderation is actually a badge of honor, right?
Yeah.
The fact that Campus Watch or Canary Mission, I'm proud to say I'm on Canary Mission.
Yeah.
I would hate if the Canary Mission ever praised me. God forbid. Then you're in deep trouble.
Yeah.
So when people who are sort of fundamentally unethical and are backing sort of really ugly and despotic things, when they attack you, that's something to be proud of.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And that's how we have to view. That's how we have to view these types of attacks.
Right.
And
they had taken him off the Canary Mission and put him back on.
Oh, did they? So
recently.
congratulations.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
It's a new honor.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Okay, very good.
but
So
no,
let's
thank you very much. And
inshallah we'll do this.
We have a lot of
We'll do this again next time I have a chance to come over.
We're going to expect you to come here
Yeah.
regularly. We have
And
some
next
exciting
time,
projects
please
coming
bring
up.
your wife with you.
Absolutely.
Because, by the way, Nader's wife, for those who don't know, is a very accomplished novelist. Her novels are amazing. I sort of have a little bit of an obsession of getting meeting her and having her sign my copies of her novels. She doesn't know that I read her novels, but they're really a pleasure to read.
I'll tell her you said that. Yeah. Thank you very much.
And I want her
Yeah.
autograph. I mean, I should get something
Yeah.
from knowing you.
Of course, yeah. No, of course, that's easy. The good thing about the move to DC is that when I was in Denver, it was like I think it was probably a 20-hour drive from Denver, DC 7 hours. So you can do it in a day.
Wow.
Yeah, even though I flew in this time, but it's like the good
Yeah.
thing about the new move is that it's drivable in one day.
Right. Perfect.
So
Good.
very
So
good to
we'll
see
expect to
everyone
see you
again,
a lot
and
more often.
inshallah.
Thank
Okay.
you so much.
Thank you, everybody. For
Shukran
being with
jazilan.
us, and we look forward to getting together again, hopefully with another thing.
Mhm.
But please support us, because I think we're doing a lot of brave work, and we're 100% donor funded, listener supported. If you get our podcast, and I think people know that we'll say things and do things here that you won't find anywhere else, and so this is that time. It really, I think Gaza has been such
Mhm.
a turning point for so many
Yeah.
people, really puts things into priority, makes you
Mhm.
have to think about what do you
Mhm.
really stand for, what do you care about, and what is the legacy you want to leave behind? What do you want to say to, Allah? Because how many of us are dying? We could go at any moment. And I think what matters is what we've done, what we've left
Mhm.
behind, what we stood for. So we're
Mhm.
trying to make that matter here in this space. So thank you all very much. And we look forward to seeing you soon, inshallah, at a minimum next week with the khutbah. Thank you to Cheyenne for a brilliant khutbah. And assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
I need to run to the restroom. Did
Yeah.
anyone